You're live, Roxy.
Oh, we are. There's no intro.
Yeah, I have to pull it in.
Oh, okay. So we're already live. I'm so sorry. Hey, everybody. It's been quite the day. As you well know, all over the news today is this Obama healthcare, whatever you want to call it. And I just want to make mention that really get yourselves educated before the first. Walgreens. Walgreens is one who basically dropped the insurance policies today from 160,000 workers, and the many corporations are going to be following suit. So if those of you who are getting your insurance, your health insurance dropped, or you're like my husband who got his rates tripled about 3 days ago, so you might want to consider looking into what is happening. There's a filibuster going on today. Don't you dare turn the channel yet and watch it or listen to it yet. You could probably take a look at it later. But there's a filibuster going on right now regarding the Obama health care. They are trying to block it. Of course, we're in the 11th hour, a few days away from it going into law October 1st. But you might want to educate yourself. I will be doing a show on it later in the year to help navigate what's going on. And by the way, this is a very difficult thing because some of the states aren't doing the state exchanges. People are confused if they block the funding or the appropriations is what it's called for the bill. We're going to be in a lot of trouble. Of course, they're threatening one more time to close the government down. And you know what I say, and I've said it before, let them close for a couple of days. Please let them close. Anyway, my guests this evening, a little bit of a switch around for who's going to be on the show. Nevertheless, it's going to be even better than we had planned. We're going to talk about fracking, a very, very important topic. I would put it on the top 5 of my priority list if I were anyone listening. Chat room, good evening. If you have any questions for our guests, please put them in the chat room. And if you can put them in all caps, our producer Thomas will be glad to pick them up. My first guest, we're going to bring them on all together. Okay, they all have a perspective, different perspective that we all need to hear. We really need to listen to what these gentlemen have to say. Doug Shields, for instance, in 2003, when Doug won the Democrat primary for Pittsburgh City Council, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote, quote unquote, for 11 years, Doug Shields has been the consummate City Hall insider, working behind the scenes as the chief of staff for former city councilmen. Now he's about to move to center stage. Shields did take center stage and quickly ascended to positions of power in the council. I want to interject here for a moment, listeners. This is a man who is wanting, and successfully has already banned fracking in certain areas. This is one of the good guys. Yes, I know. You don't like people in government. You don't want to talk to anybody who's in government. Let me tell you something. This is a man who did something about it. He's one of the good guys. So, as it says, Shields did take center stage and quickly ascended to positions of power in the council. In 2004, he was appointed chair of the Finance Committee in the throes of the city's financial crisis, and in 2006, he was elected president of the council, and again in 2009, he left office at the end of 2011. During his tenure on the council, he was recognized for his expertise on government financing, land use and zoning, legislative writing ability, and taking on social issues few others would. He introduced and had enacted laws on matters such as domestic violence within the city police force, prevailing wages for service workers on city-funded projects, protection from harassment at women's reproductive health facilities, reporting of lost or stolen firearms, and a LGBT registry to help facilitate same-sex benefits for the private sector. In August of 2010, he introduced the CELDF, Community Rights Ordinance in the council, with a unanimous 9-0 vote. He's going to talk about that a little bit with us. It became law on November 16, effectively banning shale gas drilling in Pittsburgh, the first place in the world to do so. And we're going to talk about why this should be banned. We're talking about natural gas. We're talking about hydraulic systems. We're talking about some very Contaminants that you don't want in your body. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Doug to the show. Doug, thanks so much for taking the time. I know that I interrupted you today, and you were at a city council meeting, were you not?
Yes, well, I was at the county council meeting. The county executive wants to frack the park, and it's great to be back on the show, Roxy. I really appreciate you having me back on.
Thank you so much. This will be very interesting. I really hope people take notes on this because it does get a little convoluted, but you have such a way, Doug, with words and explaining exactly what's going on. We have another guest on the show, and his name is Ben Price. Ben works with the guest that we did have planned, Thomas Lindsay. But Thomas Lindsay, we kind of got the dates mixed up, and it's okay. Thomas will come back another time. He's actually unavailable to do the show, so I'm very happy to say that Ben Price is here to do the show with us this evening. Ben, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much, Roxy. Glad to be here.
Right on. And then we have Yuri Gorby. And Yuri, why don't you go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself as well to the audience, and then we can get started on the conversation of fracking and government.
Well, thank you, Roxy. Thanks for having me on. Excuse me. Yeah, my name is Yuri Gorby. I'm a professor here at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and I'm originally from West Virginia. And it's, as we all know, pretty heavily impacted down there, and increasingly so. So I'm really having a great opportunity here to, really am honored to be on the show here, especially with Doug, and looking forward to talking with Ben as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, it's an honor to have all of you. Doug, let's get started on something here. What was your interest? What startled you? What brought fracking to your attention?
It all began with the leasing, and even backing up a little further in 2003, it was a big banner headline here in Pittsburgh. Pennsylvania was sitting on top of a boatload of gas, about commensurate amount of energy that's underneath the Saudi Arabian Peninsula. And certainly I and everybody else was like, well, gee, that's good news. But we really didn't understand what that meant. Pennsylvania had been where the gas industry began, the oil industry began here, 140 years ago, 130 years ago, I guess, and just north of Pittsburgh. And so we were culturally attuned to drilling and so forth in this region. The glory days had long passed, but, there's still gas wells operating and so forth in shallow wells. And for the most part, they're not really all that much of a big deal. However, we're talking about drilling unconventional gas. And as we started to learn, and they started to lease all over the place, they'd lease a mailbox if they could, I think, at that time in like 07 and 8 and 9. We started getting calls in city council in my district and a couple of others in Pittsburgh that people were going door to door, knocking on the door and offering a $1,200 check to lease a 2,000, 3,000 square foot lot. And it didn't make any sense. So I got calls, and I'm like, well, gee, I better start looking into this. The more I looked into it, the more I had cause for alarm. And it was during this period of time that a place called Dimock, Pennsylvania, up in the northeastern part of the state, had lost its water. There was a bad well casing put in by a company called Cabot Oil. They steadfastly denied that they were the cause of the contamination for some time, and then eventually it was proven conclusively that there was a bad well casing. That's what protects our water supply, and resulted in the contamination of the village of Dimock up there in the upper northeast Pennsylvania, near the New York border. We also started to hear from people in Washington County, just south of the city, about 30 miles, and in farmland and whatnot, and there were problems showing up there too. And most notably was the most notorious case was the Halowich case, where the Halowich family did lose their water supply. They had not leased, but everybody was around them did. They had wells and a compressor station, a cryo plant, which separates the wet gases, the propane, the butane, and the ethane from methane, which is, the methane is what you see commonly on a stovetop or something like that. And, of course, we heard all about that in the news in the past few months. We made worldwide news because the family finally settled to get the heck out of there. And they were under a gag order as part of that settlement, including children, which, of course, the industry was terribly embarrassed by the result of that case being unsealed by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and Washington County Observer reporter wanted to find out what was going on. And, of course, the industry tried like crazy to shield us from the facts, but thanks to the press, they opened it up, and there we found it. And then they backtracked like crazy, saying that you can't gag children. You know, they're minors, and they have First Amendment rights, and they're not bound to their parents' agreements. And during the course of our deliberations in 2010, when it became much more public, we had 3 wells explode within 60, 70 miles of Pittsburgh. One was in Clearfield County. The area around it, which is thankfully sparsely populated, a 2-mile evacuation area. It took 13 to 18 hours, somewhere in thereabouts, for a crew to come up from Texas to put the wildfire out because nobody in Pennsylvania's emergency responder teams know how to do that. And that's expensive, too. You got to equip and train, whether the one's blowing up or not. You got to be ready. And all these things kept coming in. Then we started hearing more about water impacts, air quality impacts, and from there the list just keeps going on. Insurance. All state insurance refuses now to underwrite residential property, for instance. They don't want to assume the risk. This is a corporation that is in the business of bets. They take risk, and educated bets at that, and they didn't like the odds, so they said, we're not underwriting anymore. We have people trying to get refinancing or new mortgages on properties that are leased. Banks are walking away because the collateral on the surface, the home, is going to be devalued as a result of drilling operations, and that's their collateral, so they're not underwriting now. And then, as I said, there's a laundry list of impacts that weren't considered in 2010 that have now come to the fore. And the more we study this and the more we examine the aspects of unconventional drilling for Marcellus Shale and the other shale bed plays around the world, we're finding that it's unconventional for a lot of reasons. And it's a direct threat to the health, the welfare, and the safety of the public. And so that's why we acted. We came forward and we said, hey, wait a minute. We have the rights. We're the people. We're the final arbiters here. And despite what the federal government and the United States Congress has done, good luck there, and in the State House of Pennsylvania and the governor's office, where $28 million was spent over 6 years lobbying these guys, they weren't thinking about our health, welfare, and safety. So as it has fallen upon local officials throughout the United States to step up, and they have, and there, thank God for the local official, and we're the ones on the front line now, and we're the ones to stand between the safety of the community and what's going on by these corporate drillers that come in and just want to push everybody aside and tell us we have no rights.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I really appreciate the stand that you've taken and the amount of work and pressure that you put on them, because that's really what it takes. Ben, I'd like for you to join us now. What, from your perspective, if you'd like to detail that for us, what do you see in your office and working with Tom in regards to the actions that you can take from within the government to oppose and officially ban? Is it just locally for you, or have you reached out at all to other congressmen and lawmakers across the nation to get this ban nationally? And if not, why not?
Well, where we begin to hear about what's wrong, what's going wrong, what isn't working in terms of government and the protections of government, it comes from the local communities. And in the case of Pittsburgh, I was invited to a conversation with one of the city council members, one of Doug's colleagues at the time, who was on council. As a matter of fact, Bill Peduto, who's running for mayor at the moment. I was invited by Bill into a conversation with actually probably more than 25 environmental groups. And the conversation was, what can we do in Pittsburgh to do something to protect the community against this industrial activity of fracking? And so I was directly involved in the Pittsburgh effort and have been with many other communities on this issue. And that conversation expanded into the larger question of, what can local governments do? What does law allow Pittsburgh or any municipality in the country to do to protect the rights of the citizens living within the community? And, unfortunately, the answer is the structure of law that we've constructed over the years doesn't allow us to do much. We have a regulatory system in place. We have regulations that are put in place by the legislature. And then we have regulatory agencies that issue permits that allow certain corporations to engage in industrial activities that have been legalized by the legislature. And then we pretend that we've got an overlay of protections, of regulations that say there are limits on how much damage can be done in any given community. And, that's worked not really very well over the years, but in terms of fracking with an industrial process that is so clearly a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the community, to the natural environment, to the rights of the people living in any given community, to their property rights. We have an industry that has been given a clear path to enter into any community. And in Pennsylvania, that was our experience learning what the legislature has done. A clear path was opened up for the frackers to come in against the consent of the community and act against their consent to drill away as almost at will. Zoning was used as a stopgap, as a way of saying, well, we're going to try to remove this, the wellheads and put them at places somewhat distant from our residential areas. And we've had challenges even to that. And I mean in Pennsylvania, through state legislature, in Ohio, and in many other states where fracking is taking place. And so back to Pittsburgh, in 2010, having talked with Bill Peduto, one of the members of City Council, and with a number of other community folks with interest in helping the community, of course, but offering only regulatory solutions. In other words, suggesting that the best you can do under current law is limit the damage. You're not allowed to legally stop it because the state legislature has decreed that fracking is legal. And if it's legal, you must find a place for it in your community, even with zoning. That wasn't a satisfactory answer for the city councilman. I was fortunate enough, and I have to say your introduction of Doug Shields was appropriate. It's really amazing to encounter a public servant who actually believes that his job is to serve the public. And as, not to get into the rest of the details, but as things evolved, I ended up working directly with Doug Shields on drafting legislation that created a community bill of rights that recognized the rights of the community to clean air, pure water, the right to local self-government, the rights of the natural community to exist and flourish, and the authority of the people to protect all of these rights by prohibiting corporate activities such as fracking, such as the extraction of natural gas. And that's what we began to talk about. Rather than how can we limit the damage, how can we, given that the legislature has stated that fracking is legal in Pennsylvania, that's not an adequate answer to the community's concerns and the protection of their rights, as Doug Shields has said. It's not adequate to say we're going to limit the damage to rights. Rights are the higher law. Rights are actually higher law than regulatory law. They're higher law than environmental law. They're higher law than any state statute. They exist before the Constitution does. Your right to exist, your right to life and liberty, your right to breathe clean air and pure water, which life depends on. These are fundamental laws that can't be legitimately put aside by the state issuing permits to corporations, legalizing their power to come into your community and violate your rights. Now, if that's true, if that makes any sense to anybody, then it makes sense that a community, a city like Pittsburgh, or a municipality, a borough, a suburb of Pittsburgh, or a township, or a town outside of the residential and the suburban areas, a rural community, that the people there elected to govern and protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community, that they have a fundamental right and authority to make law to actually create that protection, that they can't be preempted, that authority can't be usurped by the state saying, oh, no, that's beyond your authority locally. We can issue permits to a corporation and empower them legally to violate rights. Well, that's an absurdity, and it's clearly an absurdity when you think about it, when you deconstruct it that way. So the conversation we had, and Doug Shields led the charge. He took the draft ordinance that we put together, a community bill of rights, recognizing fundamental rights to health, safety, and welfare, to clean air, pure water, a healthy environment, a right to make decisions for our community to protect ourselves, took that ordinance to city council and was persuasive enough to bring about a unanimous vote, 9-0, November 16th, 2010. It was a remarkable day. And all I can say is, hats off to Doug, hats off to community members who stood up and said, this is what we insist on. We're behind you, Doug. And hats off even to the council members who, some of them went along a bit reluctantly, but they heard the voice of their community and they understood that they had a responsibility to them. So
may I ask a quick question? May I ask a quick question, Ben? You said some of the council members, because it was a 9-0, so it was a huge win, but they were reluctant. What would make them, in all honesty, what would make somebody reluctant to not honor the rights of the citizens of our country in that higher law?
Well, that's a question I wish I could answer. I can't speak for what happens in the hearts and minds of other folks, and all I can say is that there's certainly a disincentive to serve the people when there's strong incentive to serve corporations instead. When money talks, it talks loudly. And when people want to be elected, they require money, unfortunately. And Doug has talked about this in terms of state legislators, and he knows better than I. And I'm not comfortable saying what might be in the hearts of anyone on city council in Pittsburgh, or past members or current members. But I will say that there's a lot of pressure brought to bear on our public servants that's beyond the control and beyond the knowledge of average citizens. Unfortunately, to grab the ear of our legislators at the state level seems impossible. And that's one reason why we begin to organize at the local level. It's not because that's the place to end. Certainly we need to create constitutional change at the state and the federal level that recognizes that people have rights to self-govern in the communities where they live, that so long as government is used as an instrument to protect rights and not to offend rights, that self-government is a right that we all have, not just in the abstract, but where we live. So why do people elected to office feel that they don't have to serve those ends? I wish I knew the answer to that.
Right. When we get back, we're going to take a quick break, Ben and Doug and Yuri, and of course all of our listeners. When we get back, we'll ask some more questions about this as well. A very good education for everybody. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Truth Tonight. I'm Roxy Lopez.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message. Thank you for tuning in to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. If you plan to call in and speak with one of our hosts, please turn down your radio and separate yourself from any background noise and wait for the area code to be called on before you speak. And don't forget, Revolution Radio freedomslips.com is listener supported. So stop by the homepage, freedomslips.com, visit the site support area to help support the host you're listening to's airtime. Thank you. Revolution Radio freedomslips.com, where the truth never sleeps.
All right.
Hi, I'm Jason Brentwood with Crush the News, and you're listening to Revolution Radio. And now back to The Truth Denied with Roxy Lopez.
And welcome back. Ben, I was going to ask you, to continue what you were saying, continue on your thought, because I did get in there and ask you why anybody would be reluctant to be part of something, and you answered the question very well. And you're right. I don't know how many of our citizens understand at a local level even the pressure, as you mentioned, of the corporations, really. And so, and money that's involved as well. There's a lot of money, big money.
Yeah, well, most of us go to a job, many of us do go to a job in the morning and show up at an office, and we figure that our income is as secure as it can be. The economy is rough and all of that. Politicians go to their jobs and their incomes and their longevity and their professional careers are dependent on serving the right people. Now, it would be wonderful if serving the right people meant serving your constituents, because they would guarantee that you would be reelected and so forth. We have and I can't get into all of the details, but gerrymandering for incumbent protection by, frankly, both parties as the census season comes around and there's an opportunity to redraw electoral districts and guarantee that safe seats will be kept safe. That doesn't necessarily serve the public when it's actually the elected officials choosing their voters rather than the voters choosing their elected officials. I mean, that's one aspect of it. The money. How much does it cost to stay in office, to get elected for the first time, and so forth? But honestly, Roxy, I don't think that's the worst of it. I don't think that's the heart of the problem. Talking about our sense in the communities where we live, and our belief in our right to make decisions for outcomes. This is the community we want to live in. These are our aspirations, and they don't include fracking, and they don't include toxic waste, dumps, and they don't include factory farms. And the organization I work for, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, we're not issue focused. Our job isn't to stop fracking. Our job is to work with communities to establish the greatest degree of local self-government and democracy possible. And when I say local, That's what I mean. In other words, the people affected by governing decisions ought to be the ones who make those decisions, either directly or through local representatives who have the authority to make those decisions on their behalf. We don't live in that system, and this is maybe a controversial thing to say. I'm sure it is. But I'd assert we don't really have a democracy, and we don't really have a republic. A republic would imply that the people who elect their representatives have their interests and their aspirations actually looked after, and that their instructions to their representatives are taken seriously and aren't set aside as mere opinions of the people. The people have more than opinions. They're the sovereigns. They're the ones who are the government in a democracy. And if that's not the case, then we have something else.
Understood. You know, I want to bring Yuri in here. Thank you, Ben. I want to bring Yuri in here now to give his opinion as well. Yuri, you, as you said, you're a professor, and just give us an idea from your perspective, any data that you might have read, collected, etc., on fracking, hydraulic fracking. Are people getting sick? Is this some really bad stuff, Yuri? Yuri?
Yes. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Great. Thanks, Roxy.
Did you hear the question?
I did. I was having a little bit of trouble here, but now I think I've figured out what was wrong. Yes. Well, the fact is that there are more people become impacted by the development of high-volume slickwater hydraulic fracturing and all related infrastructure. That's the cryogenic separation facilities, compressor stations, the network of pipelines, all of which have failures, all of which release toxic emissions during normal operation. I first came back from the West Coast. I spent 15 years at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation as a scientist there, working on issues related to uranium transport in groundwater, and I was around a lot of the subsurface science community for the U.S. Department of Energy for a long time. Moved down to California to do some work at one of the sequencing facilities down there, the J. Craig Venter Institute, and I came back east to give a talk to at the invitation of my friend John Stoltz at the Duquesne University. And when I came back here in December of 2011, I gave my talk, and then John asked me, "Have you ever heard of hydraulic fracturing?" I told him, "Yeah, I think right in the mid 2004, 2005, I heard some rumblings of it in DOE, but we never really heard much more about it afterwards." So he said, "Well, come here, I want to take you on a little tour." So he just took me outside of Pittsburgh. I think we went 20 miles, 30 miles outside of town. And first of all, I saw all of the developments, or full yards for all the pipeline that were going in. Now I'm from Bethany, West Virginia. It's only 50 miles from Pittsburgh. It's just right across the state line. And I've been to Pittsburgh. I mean, that's where we hang out a little bit. And so, but I've never seen like the industrialization happening at such a scale, the truck traffic. And I was like, wow, what is this? And then I got my first view of one of these well pads with a rig on it, and it was just remarkable. I mean, we drilled pretty deep out at the Hanford Nuclear Facility, but we've never seen anything like this. And I think it was because it was one of these rigs that can take and turn it a bit horizontally, and I was just awestruck by it, to tell you the truth. But then, he said, "Do you know they're doing this in your hometown in Bethany, like at Bethany College? They leased their property." And I was like, "What?" This is, so I checked it out, and sure enough, 2,000 feet above the student dormitories, Chesapeake Energy had leased had started a deal with Bethany College, the president and the board of trustees, and they had installed or were installing the pad. And they have since drilled them, and my understanding is they've recently fracked it. when I saw that, and I went back to California, this was in December of 2011, I had heard about a job opportunity up at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, and I applied for it, and I got it. One of the reasons was to come back to the East Coast to apply the knowledge that I obtained during my 25 years in science to problems related to the subsurface, because I knew this is not a good idea. I mean, we know how impacted the subsurface is when you drill down into it and you manipulate it. But when I really got a handle on what they're talking about, directional drilling, high volume, slickwater hydraulic fracturing, it was a new, like an eye-opening experience that I knew that our subsurface in that region of Appalachia where I grew up, and all of the waterways in that area would be absolutely impacted by this technology. And as I came back and I visited the places where it was actively happening, and I have been for the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, you know the damage. I mean, it's evident not only in the landscape that has changed and the truck traffic that you're behind constantly, but in the rashes that people have and the costs, the incessant costs that they have, and the loss of memory to recall telephone numbers, and how many times, oh yeah, I can give you a number, I used to know it, but how many people have dozens of people that I ran into just going to communities to see, okay, well, I'd like to set up some, testing facility down here, and to see the impact that it had directly on people's health. That was something that I just couldn't take anymore. And so I think that we have long-term problems to deal with the unknowns that have the damage that has already been done to the subsurface and the release of toxins to the surface environment through the basically disposal, with quotation marks around it, of the waste streams, the multiple waste streams that are coming from these systems. That the damage to our area in Appalachia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and if it happens, continues up here in New York where I am now, will last for generations, and we will feel the impact already. If we cease activity absolutely right now, the spectrum of effects on water quality, on the migration or transfer of contaminants into wildlife populations and human populations, that will continue to express itself. We can expect long-term effects already if we stop our activities right now. So, if people should be preparing themselves for the cancer rates that are going to go up through all of this. Like, I'm not a medical doctor, but through my contacts with the multiple medical professionals, doctors, nurses, toxicologists that I've had the pleasure of meeting with over those last year and a half, I've come to know that, cancer or chemically induced cancers, with the exception of leukemia and those types of cancers take at least 10 years to develop, to manifest. And so we can expect those rates to increase already. Prepare ourselves for it. Now,
and may I interrupt you for a moment, Yuri? I don't know if you know the answer, but maybe Doug or Ben might know the answer. From a scale of a 1 to a 10, as far as environmental impact and toxic waste, and at the speed in which it's creating toxicity, etc., I'm referring to fracking, what is it on a scale from a 1 to 10 different than oil drilling, let's say?
Well, this is Doug, and I'd be happy to answer that. I think it's an 11 when you want to compare the two processes. It's an extraordinary amount of impact prior to starting with seismic testing that causes damages to building foundations, wells in the area, because they're either using dynamite to send a sound echo down there, all the way through that process. And right up, the other part of it is that not only is there that physical process that is so damaging, from the fracking itself, the flaring, the giving off of gases, the bad well casings, and then the waste stream disposal, which is just incredibly bad. And then there's the pollution of our government. That's why I would rate it, if you want to, on a 1 to 10, I'd give it an 11. I've never seen anything quite like it.
They've really speeded it up too. It sounds like in the last few years they're going gangbusters, which is, I think, would even be even more of a concern. So thanks for that. So an 11. Wow, that's pretty alarming. Yuri, as far as your involvement, are you in any way involved in anything to try to, as well as these gentlemen are, as Doug and Ben are you involved in anything to try to coalitions or to try to stop fracking or get it banned or anything like that?
Well, not directly. I mean, I am a scientist, and I do try to maintain my grasp on scientific code of conduct and the scientific method. But it doesn't take a scientist to realize that, it's that thing up on the hill that are making your children sick. It's that thing up on the hill and the sweet smell that we smell in the air is what caused these skin infections that now, after your second round of antibiotics, is not clearing up, that this open wound persists. So in those cases, I said, this is criminal activity that's happening down here. People are being poisoned. However, as a microbiologist and being connected to a scientific community that can do analysis on microorganisms, for instance, that might be associated with those wounds, those infections, that I sampled those. They are being analyzed for the genetic material, the metagenome of these, to identify not only what organisms might be associated with these things, but to identify the genes that could encode for antibiotic resistance, to identify genes that might be involved in pathogenicity, might reveal the genes that these organisms came from 350 million year old like seabed formations or material around that.
That's a good observation. When I don't know if the audience understands what exactly what fracking is, and we'll probably do like a 5-minute on that during the show, just to give people an idea of how deep they're digging and what they're. But that's a great. You just said something that really sparked something in me. When they're digging and fracking and breaking the shale up, etc., are they letting loose some biological, like naturally biological occurring microorganisms into the ground that were never supposed to be released as well?
Well, this is not meant to be alarming in any way, but we have drilled down, we being the scientific community that likes to look for life at the most extreme conditions and the most remote places on Earth, have drilled down 5 miles and have, starting at the bottom of the ocean, and recovered organisms from that depth. So microorganisms from very far in the distant past of the Earth are present in these near surface or these deep formations. Now, shale formations have been superheated during their genesis, and so they've been heated up to 150 degrees centigrade. It is likely that most of the organisms there would have been cooked or sterilized, or the system would have been sterilized, but no one really has yet to demonstrate conclusively that those drill cuttings that they're bringing up do not contain, if not bacteria, then perhaps viruses. Now, we have to remember that for the Marcellus Shale, that's 350 million years in the past. That's before the existence of mammals. So that if there were pathogenic viruses or bacteria that may have survived that time, that they would have existed prior to the existence of mammals. Now, I'm not saying that they are not here on the surface already, because unlikely. I mean, the Marcellus tails up, and you have outcroppings up here in New York State, and you have those organisms there as well. But combining the volume of which we're bringing this out of these deep formations and combining it with all of the liquids fully hydrating the system, the mixing of that with chemicals, and then the broad distribution throughout the region in waterways, in deep well injections that will fail, that can fail due to the earthquakes that they generate, like we have over in Youngstown, Ohio, and Oklahoma, and everywhere else where deep well injections. The bottom line is that scientifically there is no basis to continue to say that there is no risk that we are mobilizing potentially pathogenic organisms or compounds from these deep formations, and that they're being spread into our current day environment. So until that's done, I think that we should be, quite cautious about the way we proceed and do everything possible, and that is the apply the scientific tools available for metagenomic analysis, for the ability to take sterile or uncompromised samples and completely analyze the microbial composition of those formations. We have the ability to do it, but we don't have any funding. That group of scientists that I used to...
Okay, here, I've got a question here. I understand you don't have the funding, and nobody's going to fund it because they don't want to know. Doug and Ben, this question's for you. Is there a possibility, because I like what Yuri's talking about, let's study it, let's look at it, let's make a connection, a proving ground between health and environmental toxicity and fracking, et cetera. Is there a way to put a moratorium on this right now so that evidence can't...
I'm sorry, this is Ben, and I just wanted to say, Yuri is an honest scientist.
Mm-hmm.
He's speaking from the basis of the scientific method, which is let's go out and ask real questions, and let's go out and make the facts reveal, the facts. Unfortunately, we have another form of scientific reporting that comes out of, unfortunately, some of our universities that are well funded by industry, and that report things that are biased, and that even if they reveal, not falsehoods, sometimes withhold truths. Now, let's set that aside because I don't want to focus on that. Let's pretend that every scientific study, every scientific report that ever came out, every environmental impact statement and health study that ever came out is absolutely pristine and honest and without bias. In the end, and what I like about what Yuri has said is he seems to be saying, and Yuri, please correct me if you don't agree, but in the end, it's the people directly affected by the decision-making who get to read the science and make democratic decisions based on it. In other words, the arguments that sometimes we hear politicians make that say, we have to let the science decide. Well, no. In a democracy, we don't let PhDs decide everything. God love them.
we let money decide everything. That's what we do.
Well, in a democracy we don't, but yes,
right.
Under current circumstances, money seems to decide everything.
Mm-hmm.
What if we actually let the people who are directly affected by decision making decide based on their best information? And an honest scientist like Yuri will say, we don't know everything. We just don't know everything, and so we can't give you the absolute answer to anything. You're asking about possible, Paleolithic organisms that might be brought up from the depth.
Ben, how about, and Yuri and Doug, how about just the obvious? The obvious. I mean, and like I asked, is there even an opportunity to use part of the law, in other words, put a moratorium, stop the actions until they can look further into it? Because obviously there is concern. Obviously, there are people getting sick since these wells, if you call them wells or whatever they're called, showed up in their neighborhoods or within 50 to 100 miles, I guess, of their homes or their areas, and showed up in the water and all the contaminants, et cetera. So obviously, there's something that fracking has contributed to sickness, illness, and environmental disaster, is what it sounds like. So
Roxy,
what about
a
moratorium?
To finish one last statement, and I'll be quiet.
Nobody's answering my question, though.
I'm trying to. And in the answer to a moratorium, what if instead a community just makes its mind up, the community that might be affected by the fracking, and because my point is that it's the people directly affected that should make the decision. That's the assertion I'm making. Rather than the scientists who make their best guess, rather than the industry that has a money interest, rather than the politicians that have sometimes a money interest and sometimes a longevity interest, why not let, in a democratic process, let the people who will be directly affected by the outcome of the decision make the decision? And if we do, and I'll finish real quick, what's a moratorium versus a ban? Because that's, I think, what you're getting at.
Oh, no, no, you're right. You're right. I mean, a ban's better.
And so with a ban, okay, look, maybe a ban isn't the right thing, okay? Let me just posit that as a possibility. If a ban isn't the right thing, will a ban harm anybody? No more than a moratorium will. Will a ban be forever? Well, here's the thing. A moratorium we know won't be. It will expire. And then the community that might be concerned about the issue might have to then mobilize again to try to bring it around again. What if they ban it until they know that it's absolutely safe, rather than allowing it until they know that it's absolutely going to be a killer?
I love it.
Yeah, and I'll throw my 2 cents on that. From a political strategist point of view, there's what Ben is saying is absolutely true. But and I think this is part of the political process where when you can't get a ban, people fall back to Plan B and go for the moratorium and buy time. And that's the case in New York State, where they had a 4-year moratorium. I believe it's in its 6th year, because the political people don't have, and the governor, Cuomo, they're fidgeting. They know what's going on. They've done their studies. The reports have been done up for over 2 years now. But if you want to run for president of the United States, as Mr. Cuomo wanted to, you're not going to get elected without the oil and gas industry money in your campaign coffer. The Governor O'Malley in Maryland also enacted a moratorium before they started to drill, and that was a 3-year deal, and I think they're in their 4th year now, because the body politic in the legislature is again futzing and fidgeting. So the value of a moratorium is, as Niccolo Machiavelli said in The Prince, time is your ally in all things. So, the practical effect is to buy time. And that is to get to the bottom of which many of us know here in the country as to what the harms are, and that nobody in our Congress and our state legislature don't seem to care. So, that would be the default to the option to the ban. And I think Ben's right. The burden of proof falls to this industry, and they have not met the burden of proof. And furthermore, they've shifted the burden of proof to the public to prove that they're not safe. And the burden should be, turned around and said, you come to me and tell me all about this when it's safe. And until such time, you're not doing anything. I mean, we don't let kids play with firecrackers for a good reason. You blow your hand off. Here we've got people sticking wells in the ground, and all kinds of bad things are coming back. Not to mention the things that they're putting in there, and what's going to happen to that is it migrates. And
sorry, folks. Looks like we lost Roxy.
Oh my gosh.
Hello there.
Back.
Okay. Sorry. My shows they get hacked. Anyway, so again, you're listening to The Truth Denied, and I'm back with Doug Shields, Ben Price, and Professor Yuri Gorby. Doug, I love what you're talking about as well with the burden of proof. Should not the industry, such as the fracking industry, the oil industry, natural gas industry, be the ones responsible for the tab for an environmental study paid to a third party that has no interest in the
outcome? Absolutely. That's exactly what happened in the state of Maryland. There was during its moratorium, the deal was that the oil and gas industry, if you want to come drill, we're going to do studies about 4 or 5 different types, and that the industry itself was going to pay for them. Of course, the industry refused. And interestingly, last January, those companies that had secured permits in Maryland during the moratorium withdrew them all out of Maryland. So you got to ask the question, well, what are you afraid of? If this is all so good, if this was the best...
Keep going. I'm just getting Roxy back.
Yeah, if this is the better mousetrap, then...
Hello there.
Then why don't you just pay for it? And that's, as I said, I think Roxy got cut off, but that's exactly what Maryland did, in that they required the industry to do those studies and to pay for them, and they would, the state, the government would then go out and contract to the appropriate people and complete them, and the industry then packed up and left and withdrew all their permits, I think January, February this year in Maryland, in Western Maryland. It's like, we bear, I don't want to bear the cost. And my Republican friends talk about big government and everything else. It's like, well, yeah, on that point we agree. And here it is, a corporation coming in and basically shaking the whole rug of the landscape around us. And yet we're expected to bear the brunt of the cost to find out the environmental impacts, the health studies, the land use studies, everything else, and that's all on me. Plus, I get the privilege of cleaning up their messes afterwards, or worse yet, living with them in sickness that goes along with it. What's the health care cost to this? What's the cost in Pennsylvania? We have a $2 billion a year sport fishing industry. Some of the best trout streams in the East are in Pennsylvania. Well, what's the impact on that? You don't know what you gained until you add up what you lost. And the industry does not want to do that. They don't want to show their cards. And my experience with them in Pittsburgh was, and I'll say it as plain as day, they lie through their teeth every time. They make stuff up. They deflect. They hire an army of PR people that engage in nonsensical speech. They have zero credibility in my community, and certainly with me, on down the line. And again, this gets back to Ben's point with the Community Environmental Defense Fund. Thank God they were there, because we in Pittsburgh on the council, and I certainly was struggling to come up with a zoning scheme because it's a land use issue. And after you model out some approaches, you realize that you're going to get fracked. It doesn't matter. And when Ben Price showed up at my doorstep, and Bill Peduto had conveyed to me what Ben had sent to him, the light bulb went off over my head. It was an epiphany. This isn't about drilling. This is about rights. This is about who we are as a people in this country. And we have given over our rights, are inalienable rights. We don't get them from the government. We are the government. We gave them to ourselves.
Right.
And this is what Ben really educated and taught me to focus on that. And this applies to so many other aspects, not just drilling. And that's why when Ben Price is out there saying things like, we don't have a gas drilling problem, we have a democracy problem here. And he hit the nail right on the head. And Tom Lindsay and Ben and his colleagues at Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund have stirred up a revolution in this country because, Ben, I'll ask you a question. How many places is the Community Rights Ordinance? Because it's not a ban. It's an affirmation of our rights. It's a declaration of our rights at these local government levels. Ben, how many places has CELDF gotten the bill through?
Well, geez. Thanks, Doug. It's true that our approach is really different. It is about rights. These are civil rights laws when you get down to them. They're not environmental laws. And it depends, to answer your question, if you mean just about fracking issues, to focus just on fracking. Well, we've got 17 communities now that have adopted community bills of rights that ban fracking, that ban injection wells, that ban, compressor stations and pipelines and related activities. But all around they ban fracking and related activities. When I say 17, I mean, well, we started in Pennsylvania, and Pittsburgh was the first to ban extraction of shale gas. We've had, about a half a dozen others in Pennsylvania. We have, Doug, you mentioned Western Maryland and what they're concerned about there. Mountain Lake Park is a community in Western Maryland that year after you enacted the ban on fracking in Pittsburgh, Mountain Lake Park did in Western Maryland. We have Wales, New York, that adopted a community bill of rights that bans fracking. In communities, unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, we don't have much home rule. In other words, we don't have initiative and referendum authority at the local level, but in some places we do. And in Ohio, we managed to see Broadview Heights, Ohio, and Mansfield, Ohio, enact community bills of rights banning fracking in 2012. We now have on the ballot in Youngstown and in Bowling Green, and we've been blocked in Athens, but we'll be back again, Ohio, to enact community bills of rights banning fracking. And in New Mexico, we have Las Vegas. The city of Las Vegas, New Mexico, enacted a ban on fracking based on protecting the community bill of rights. And for the very first time, Mora County, the very first county-wide ban on fracking based on protecting a community bill of rights, was enacted this past year. I haven't listed them all. Frankly, we have, I guess, 17 at this point that deal with fracking. But overall, over the past dozen years or so, in Pennsylvania and other communities, particularly in New Hampshire and Maine, where major water withdrawals by Nestle and Coca-Cola have challenged the people's right to hold on to their rights to their own aquifers, and other issues in New England, we have about 160 communities that have come to the Legal Defense Fund, and we've worked with them to enact rights-based ordinances. And when I say that, I mean our ordinances have evolved over the years, but Pittsburgh enacted really the very first solidly community Bill of Rights ordinance in 2010. And they set an example, and I think they led the way such that in terms of ordinances based on that model, the Community Bill of Rights, and this might sound a little bit astounding to your listeners, where we're used to being just submerged by corporate money and killed by legal actions against us. none of the Community Bill of Rights ordinances have been legally challenged so far. Now,
I was just going to ask that, Ben. I was going to ask that, is this a two-trick pony? In other words, as you proceed with this type of action, will they catch on and find a way around it?
Sure. And in fact, I don't, and none of my colleagues expect that we won't be challenged going into the future. When I say that we have not been so far, that's, it's wonderful for a lot of reasons, and we can speculate on why that is. Maybe it's that the industry finds that, attacking the Community Bill of Rights and walking into the court and saying, Your Honor, those people don't have those rights, but our corporation has its rights, may not be the best PR approach. However, given the fact that corporations have not historically cared much about sensitivities about people's rights, we don't expect that that's going to hold forever. So yes, do we expect the challenge at some point? Yeah, sure. Here's what it comes down to, though. These community bills of rights aren't just about creating some kind of a legal strategy to win in the courts, because frankly, in a democracy, it's not, it really isn't politically appointed people who dress up in robes who get to govern. That sounds like an old system that we had a revolution about.
Yes.
It's the people who govern, and in the end, let's think about it. Assume that a community bill of rights, let's assume Pittsburgh's or anybody else's community bill of rights is legally challenged. And in the court, the argument is, Your Honor, they don't have those rights, but we have property rights. Screw their rights to clean air and pure water. We have property rights to make money by poisoning them. That sounds like the kind of conversation we need to have in this country. It sounds like the kind of conversation between priorities that hasn't been had yet. So what I'm saying is that the community rights organizing and using law as a method to an end, it's not just a legal strategy, it's also an organizing strategy. It's no more just a legal strategy than it was for the kids in 1963 to sit down at the Woolworth lunch counter and say, Hi, I'd like a ham sandwich, please. Oh, and yes, I am black. What they were saying was, the Supreme Court says you have the perfect right to refuse to serve me, and I'm telling you that the Supreme Court is wrong because I have the perfect right to be served. What we're doing is changing.
Well, and you're making a perfect example, then, of how change has come about. Any changes in this country that affect the people. You're absolutely right. Who funds the legal fund? The Legal Defense Fund? Who funds
Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. That's a long name. I'm sorry, CELDF, and I often shorthand it and call it the Legal Defense Fund. But it's all through either individual donations or through funding of foundations. We apply like a lot of nonprofits do for funding by submitting grant proposals. That's our funding. It's not government. It's not big companies. It comes from folks who say, we think your work is worth it.
So it's not government grants?
No, not at all.
Okay. I would hope not. Yeah, well, as soon as you said grant, I was like, wait a minute. But yeah, okay. So with that in mind, it sounds to me that what's logical is A, education for the public. B, I think the biggest proponent here would be, in my opinion, my observation, correct me if I'm wrong, are those who have been harmed by fracking sites. I would think they would be the loudest voices in it, and the people, the biggest portion of individuals who would want to fight against fracking, getting rid of it, banning it, etc. And then I would say anybody who could get educated in the area to actually either visit a fracking site, as Yuri did, or even more so, others who know of sick people, for those sick individuals to also educate their families, their friends, whether they live in the area or not. And then I would think it sounds at this point that it is sort of a grassroots movement on a local level. How would you get it to a national level?
Well, Roxy, if you're asking,
I mean, would it take money? Is it money? Is it what is it that take? You know what I mean? I think it's always about money, right? But just get it to a national level.
Money, Roxy, and this is Dan, and I'm sorry, I'm conscious of not wanting to take up more time than everybody else, but I just want you to know that the Legal Defense Fund, CELDF, is working at not just the local level, but also at the state level in Pennsylvania and Ohio, in New Hampshire, in Oregon, in New Mexico, in Oregon. That's where we've begun to create statewide community rights networks with the purpose of amending state constitutions, to change state constitutions to recognize the authority of people in their own communities to not only regulate but to prohibit certain corporate activities that would violate rights. In other words, to empower people to be self-governing within the places where they live. That's a longer conversation than we have tonight, and I understand that, but I just want you to understand that it's not just about beginning at the local level. Sure, Pittsburgh was a start. Look what happened from Pittsburgh. It sparked major changes in many other communities. It sparked a conversation about why should we be told we're not allowed to say no to things that would harm our children? How is that legally possible? How is that legitimate? Those conversations haven't been, because I think, and you know, after almost 9 years of working directly in communities, I've set aside the criticism that says that people are apathetic. I don't think people are apathetic. I think people are accustomed to being told they have no voice, that they have no right to say anything, and that if they want to make decisions, well, it's not really up to them, it's up to somebody else, higher up the pay scale. In a democracy, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Ben, you're making some very good points. I mean, I've heard the conversation about apathy, and I have to tend to agree with you. I think it's disempowering to say that our country is apathetic. I'm agreeing with you 100% that power to the people is no longer. Power of the people has been stripped, and the voices are not being heard. As an example, very briefly, in my own state of Arizona, letter writing campaigns through my organization to the governor, to the senators, to the congressmen, not one of thousands of letters was ever even acknowledged as being received.
And what does that say?
What does that say? Exactly. And we are not living in the 50s where local businessmen, middle-class businessmen made calls to their congressmen and said, hey, I don't like what I'm seeing here. You need to change this, and got together in groups and forced the hands of those who make the laws and said, no, we're not going to back you up. You know, you're talking about constituents earlier. And how do you, this would be even better, how would we encourage? I like what you're talking about, because what it sounds like is that the legal defense fund that has been set up, that you've set up, it sounds like that would be the voice of the people. So the people could get behind you because you would be advocating for the people. I don't think that, generally speaking, people in this country want to get behind those in government anymore because it seems to fail.
Thanks. And I know that I want to hear from Doug, and I want to hear from Yuri too. But the thing is, Roxy, that our work isn't to have people get behind the legal defense fund. Our work is to get people to get behind themselves. We are working, and when Doug stood up and said, "Here's what we need to do, and here's the ordinance, and it's a community bill of rights." Imagine that, a community bill of rights. It's not even about fracking when you get right down to it, although it bans it. It's really about your rights to ban fracking. And
right.
what it was doing was leading the charge of people who were, kind of the wind in his wings, carrying him to do it. He had the community behind him saying, "This is what we need." My point is, to answer the question, it's not about.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
After Yuri.
That wasn't me.
Sorry, when I told you, it took me off mute.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's our producer. Are you okay?
You're
yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Not next to a gas well, is he? Oh, dear.
So,
okay, go ahead.
Just to say that it's not about people getting behind Selbeth. It's not about people getting behind Ben Price or Tom Lindsay or anybody else. What's that old saying about, we're the ones we've been waiting for?
Yes.
Well, so here's my question. What are we waiting for? If we're the ones we've been waiting for, get up.
Well, and of course, and I think that in the last, I'd say the last 5-6 years, that has become a saying, a household saying, if you will, in this country anyway. What are we waiting for? I think that is a really great question. I think that we have gone through such a shift of understanding how government works and how it doesn't work. And I think that, it just takes time for people to really come about and come around to the idea that the way government is operating today doesn't work for the people, or shall I say rarely, very rarely works for the people anymore. So I think that that's what it is. And I think that the more that we remind the public, the general public, that if indeed you want empowerment and if indeed you want to take the seat of governing again, because it is about we the people, those who are in government are they're employed by us. They're our public servants. That is exactly correct. And I don't know what they're teaching people in school. I know that's what I was taught in school way back in the day. But I'm saying in today's world, I think that citizens have lost sight of who governs this country, and it is we the people. To inspire people to take back what is ours, to take back what is owned by us and governed by us. I think the inspiration has to come from conversations that you're having. Ben, I really want to thank you for what you said and how you explained it. It was well worth the time, because what you're sharing with people is that we are the ones that have to get together to make the change. We, the people, have to get off our couch and stand up and do something and start working together collectively as a country to get our government back in shape.
And we have to become it in our communities. And I just want to defer to Doug to say that Doug Shields has been exemplary as a public servant. And we don't see it very often, and I've been a cynic in terms of government. And guess what? I still am. But it is so refreshing. It is so empowering and refreshing to meet someone like Doug who stands up and says, guess what? It's going to cost me, but guess what? I'm still going to do the right thing.
Roxy, are you there?
Yes, I am. Here I go.
There we go.
Boy, we're having some fun tonight, aren't we? Listen, Doug, can you continue on the conversation with what you were talking about when I brought up, the money aspect, and then you were referring back to the people that you had met in the process back in 2010 in Pittsburgh.
Right. Well, not only in Pittsburgh, but, as I said, thank you, Ben, for the nice, kind words. But, all I was an elected official doing my job. It was citizens, that really instigated this. And there were, and it started in the places where it was happening, and we didn't hear them. People, like Ron Gula down in Washington County, who was one of the first drill sites and lost his farm over this. Patty Gorchoff up in Youngstown, or Lee Doherty in Ireland, or Christine Canepa in Romania. All these, and James Spies in Youngstown. And we got, the Wheeling Water Warriors. I'm looking at my Facebook page right now. And there's group after group after group that just started to spring up from the places that it started to happen. The people in Pavilion, Wyoming, and John Fenton, a rancher who was featured in Gasland 2. These are the people that came to others to share their stories. And then a documentary filmmaker and playwright, Josh Fox, gets a letter in the mail and goes on a journey and produces a film that is an Oscar-nominated and Emmy Award-winning film, and goes on to do Gasland 2. Other filmmakers like Josh Perbanik and Melissa Troutman from Pennsylvania just have a film out now called Triple Divide that illustrate this and how wrong it is. And people have this instinct. You walk down the street, you don't feel comfortable. Something's up, This is what the people, their own natural instincts took over. They don't have money. The people in Youngstown right now are pushing a referendum a second time to get the community rights ordinance amended to their home rule charter. It's an uphill battle. They only lost by 12 points. If you gave me $300,000, $500,000, I'd go up there and win an election tomorrow, with those kinds of resources. But while the industry is spending hundreds of thousands, and they spent over $460,000 in Longmont, Colorado, to try to defeat that which the people want. And it's the people, and they are getting off their couches. They're getting off in droves, as a matter of fact. They're getting off their couches in California and New York. The only reason why New York doesn't have a bunch of wells sticking out of the ground is because the people of New York reacted to this. And they knew it was wrong. And there are leaders.
Well, do you think that the oil industry, Doug? Do you think that the oil industry actually wants to hide out? Like, as soon as the people in that area actually know what they're up against and start protesting and what have you, do the oil?
All you have to do is go hide. All you have to do is look at their behavior.
Okay.
Sharon Wilson, better known as Texas Sharon, works for Earthworks in Texas. Went to a drilling convention there, and didn't hide her identity, wore the badge. Earthworks was on her badge. Goes in and tape records a session, a workshop there from Matt Pizzarella of Range Resources, who operates here in Pennsylvania, and records out of their own mouths how they go about. They hire former PSYOPs military people to help, kind of put a blanket over the community. It's not working. They come up with a new story every day. They're engaging in PSYOPs in the United States. The United States government is prohibited by law of doing such things against us, we the people.
Yes.
But yet, multinational global corporations have no such restrictions, and they just go in there and they'll do lie, cheat, steal, and say anything they want, using their money, spending lots of it on TV ads that you see all day long on television, particularly in the affected areas, and on your Sunday morning news shows. Oh, this is all safe. That's a bunch of baloney. And you know what? It's not working for the industry. They've had a white paper that was produced last November. It was written up in Forbes. You can't get it online anymore. They took it down a couple of months. You have to register to get a copy of it. And, and they hired a company, I think it's called Global Solutions or something like that. It's a big think tank group, and they're all over the world with offices. And they're deeply troubled by this. And we got a hold of it. It got leaked out. And it's rare that you get to see the internal thinking of the industry, but they're deeply troubled by it. I mean, when Bulgaria signed a lease with Chevron, tens of thousands of people went to the streets and told their government, shut up, sit down, and tear that agreement up, and they did. And then Bulgaria took the next step because of the people there and then banned it in the whole nation. In Romania, I've been contacted by groups over there. They had a government coming in that was anti-fracking. 2 months later, they had signed a deal with Chevron, the old Standard Oil company. And people are really upset. They actually tried, the Prime Minister of Romania last year tried to bring in with his government General Wesley Clark, who sits on two oil and gas multinational corporation boards, as his Minister for the Environment. That's how crazy this is getting. And you know what? It is the people. Certainly there are people that play roles. I had the honor and the privilege of being elected to office to represent the people. And I learned that lesson very early on in my career. You start defending the actions of, the administration that's in office at that time, and you start thinking, what am I doing that for? I work for these people that are upset. My job is to question the administration as to what the hell they're doing in our name. And so, it is the people that are doing this. And people like Josh Fox or Melissa Troutman and Josh Pervanik, these young filmmakers that go out with an unvarnished lens and put the truth right in front of you, is what, is certainly critical. Or people like Ben Price and Tom Lindsay and the people at CELDIF that go around the country conducting democracy schools, of all things, and showing people what it is that their power is. And once they understand it, you don't need the money anymore. You don't need anything, because this is happening. And that's why this issue of fracking is so controversial. The tar sands in Canada, the reactions of the First Nations people in Canada, look what's going on in California. And again, it goes back to Ben's premise, is that, well, we'll make a deal and we'll only poison you this much, okay? And, people aren't okay with that in California. That's what's going on right now. And, in California, it's a different story, because Pennsylvania is blessed with water like you wouldn't believe. It rained all summer here. But you go to California, the whole Central Valley feeds this country. It's where, if you got broccoli on your table, it came from California, or table grapes and all this other stuff. But, in California, it's a different equation there, because now you've got a big multinational global oil industry that wants all the water to go frack. And on the other side, you got big agricultural in the Central Valley that is like, wait a minute, we don't have enough water as it is. And so the water resource issue becomes an incredibly powerful issue. Now you got multinational corporations on both sides of it shooting at each other. But, the people are the ones that are moving this. And as I wish I could go down the list and name you all these, Loretta Weir and her husband Ken, two people that would ever be couched or in terms of activists of any sort, were the ones that got me off my couch to begin to find out what it was, why they were leasing in their neighborhood. And Ken and Loretta Weir have become great friends of mine, and Bridget, my wife. And we've taken up this cause like everybody else has, and taken it out there. And it's if you go on the internet and type in no frack and use the state, Michigan, Illinois, you'll find group after group that's ad hoc. They're not funded. They are citizens that got together and said, enough is enough. They can't get into the offices, as you pointed out, and even be validated or acknowledged. Okay, I heard what you say. I appreciate it. I respectfully disagree, and we'll continue an engagement. You don't even get that. You get nothing from elected officials who are there to represent. And I always kind of make this admonishment to some of the electeds is very pointedly is to say, you don't rule us, you represent us. And to others, the civilians, if you will, the government this, the government's bad, blah, blah, blah. I said, well, if you don't like the government, go home and look in the mirror because you are the government. And that's what Ben Price does. And getting back to what Yuri Gorby's doing and what the scientific community is, come on, you got 98% of all scientific people out there acknowledge global warming, and I got a state house full of a bunch of climate change deniers sitting there saying it's junk science with no science to back it up. This is a joke. And these are the things that Josh Fox and others have put on the table and illuminated in a very special way and have galvanized the people. But by and large, I'll tell you this, before I even thought about fracking, this was all going on. I think the value of what we did in Pittsburgh was gave people a tool. They went, aha, just like I did. When I read that, when we were working on the rights bill and I saw the concept and I, saw what it was about, it's like someone going down to the hardware store and going, there's the perfect tool that I need.
Right.
And they have taken that tool and they have gone to their state capitals and they've gone to their local officials and so forth. And believe me, there is change coming. And, the other part of this is I'm against fossil fuels. Okay. Well, Doug, how are you going to turn your lights on and drive your car? Countries like Germany have already left the station, folks, and, are well on their way to a 50% renewable energy thing within the next 3 to 4 years. It's now. This isn't, some kind of science fiction fantasy. We've got homes. If you want energy independence, then put solar panels on your roof. They're getting to the price point where they're worth the while. You get a tax credit still in a lot of states and so forth. And now, we, the people, can create our own energy. Imagine a town with nothing but solar panels where you're making your own electricity and your excess capacity is being wheeled out into the rest of the community. That scares the heck out of multinational corporations and moneyed interests because it's like, you don't have a monopoly on the sun anymore. You don't have the monopoly on making me dependent upon multinational corporations for my food, my water, my thinking, and everything else. I can do this by myself. That's a very empowering thing to happen, and it's happening now. It's like when they first found oil in Pennsylvania, Standard Oil and Rockefeller were not an oil company. They were an illumination company. Because all they had was the kerosene. The gasoline from the refining process was waste at that point. And guess what Standard Oil was selling? Oil lamps. They opened retail stores all over the place. And 2 years later, guess who came along? Edison. He invented the light bulb. Well, that's the end of that business model. And if it wasn't for Henry Ford and the mass production of the internal combustion engine, who knows where the oil and gas industry would have gone. But just like when Edison invented the light bulb, as we begin to exploit clean technology by way of solar, wind, and God knows what else it seems whatever we imagine we end up accomplishing through our technology and our science, is that we have a path and we have a clear alternative to being tied to these moneyed interests, and it doesn't seem like their money is not going to save them. They don't make a lot of buggy whips anymore, as they say. And as we move further and further away from fossil fuel dependency and begin to develop and apply, not develop, apply the technologies that are here right now, imagine what that future is. There are 2 small towns in New York that are completely off the grid. They make their own energy. There is another path. And in Australia, it's going like gangbusters. And this is where the future's at. And what you have a lot of people doing is clinging to a past that's done, that they only cling to it because of the power and the money and the people the people that I mentioned and thousands and probably millions more across the globe are going to find their own way. That's the way we are. And if we continue to poison our planet, poison our children, heat the atmosphere up, well, then who's going to benefit from that? And, people like Bill McKibben out there right now, on the XL pipeline deal, again, all you're doing is wasting time and money. And the public, has another answer. And it seems like our leadership doesn't understand what vision is. They can't see over the horizon and see what the future is because they're clinging to the money, they're clinging to the power, and it's so empty, it's ridiculous. So, no, we don't need money. Money's nice. What we need are people to become, the self-realization of who they are and what we're all about as people on this earth. And
I love that you
Gorby and others in the scientific community. Look at the scientific community. You've got knuckleheads standing up in state legislatures in Oklahoma or Pennsylvania or wherever, making the most absurd statements. Someone makes a poster of it along with their quote and puts it on Facebook, and everybody laughs. But the joke's on us because these are the people that are deciding my future, and that's got to stop. And and where science comes in to kind of draw Yuri back into this is that they have, if you want to know what the harms are, sit down with Tony and Graffia or Yuri Gorby or people like John Stoltz here doing work in Duquesne University on the water impacts in Pennsylvania. This is what's going to turn the wheel here. And in fact, the wheel's turning. And unfortunately, the shareholder as well as the guy scraping the money off the table don't seem to understand that.
Absolutely. I just got a Skype, Doug, that says to be sure to make Doug Shields run for president.
Sure, why not?
That came from Mark Eddy.
Oh, Mark's down in West Virginia. He's down there with the Water Warriors and Robin.
Mark is with her. And by the way, I want to thank Mark because Mark helped me at the last minute when I had my phone go down and was at Verizon getting another phone. And Mark kind of took over trying to get a hold of some people, and he got a hold of Yuri for us. So thank goodness. And I want to thank Tom, even though he's not here, for getting Ben for the show as well. So it really helped out. Everybody made it. Now, this site you were talking about, all you have to do is Google "no frack" and fill in your state, and you'll find.
I just said, no, what I meant was just go on Facebook and type the words "no frack" and then type in any state. And you'll get a list of different organizations that are out there. They're close by or not. Go friend them, make some contact and find out what's going on and lend a hand.
And then can people contact you as well, Doug?
Absolutely. I'm on Facebook.
How does it? Okay.
Yeah, the easiest way to get me is Facebook, and from there you'll be connected with a global. It's amazing the power. That's probably one of the key things here. I don't think this could have happened 30 years ago. But that was pointed out in the white paper the industry did on what the heck to do about all these protesters and whatnot. And they pointed to the fact that social media has revolutionized if something bad happens in New Zealand, we know about it in Pittsburgh within minutes, and vice versa, and then on to Ireland or France or Romania and Bulgaria and God knows where else. But, if you look at my Facebook page, it's basically a clearinghouse of news, information, links to other people out there. And we're seeing a lot of that happening now. For instance, Pennsylvania, we've been at it for almost 4 years now, organizing, working with one another collaboratively. But it's starting to hit Michigan. It's starting to hit Illinois now. And we're helping those people take those first steps, all of us, whether we're down in the Haynesville Shale or Barnett Shale in Fort Worth or John Fenton out in Wyoming and Pavilion. We're all there to help. And so that if any of your listeners are interested, or you're in a place where this is starting to come and you're not quite sure what this is all about, stop in on my Facebook page and hit the friend button and start reading up and start getting connected.
Hey, Roxy, this is Ben.
Yeah, Ben, hold on a second. Ben.
Yeah, sure.
Can you hear me? Yeah, hold on a second. I'm trying to get the information out for all of you into the chat room. I'm letting the chat room know that we're dropping in some addresses for them. And then, of course, we'll put all of this into the article so that others can, contact any of you or join Facebook and learn some information. And which brings me to you, Ben. Ben, do you have any contact information for the public that they can get a hold of?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to share was if we have folks serious about organizing around community rights, Ben Price at CELDF.org. So CELDF.org, Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.org. Send me an email, and if you really want to get busy and you want to make law locally to stop the corporations from pushing you around, let us know.
Absolutely. That's good information. And then Yuri, yours is Gorby, which is YGORBY @gmail.com if people want to write to you. And then, of course, we just dropped in the education website that you gave us as well, Yuri. And the other thing is, Ben, do you have a website or anything?
Yes, we do. Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. It's CELDF.org. Please go to our website. You'll be able to see latest news updates, and there is a heck of a lot of information throughout the website.
Okay, I'll make sure to get that out to the public as well, Ben. And Doug, I've given the public your Facebook page. And do you have an email address, Doug, that if somebody wanted to write you an email?
Yes, it's Douglas, DOUGLAS, .shields, SHIELDS, @google.com.
Okay, thank you. And so there you have it, everyone. We've got about a minute left. So, Yuri, why don't you jump on here and let me tell you, I'm glad that you joined the conversation this evening, and we didn't get to talk to you a whole lot. But, Yuri, we're glad to have you, and perhaps you could come back another time to express with us, some of the harm that fracking has caused people.
Well, thanks for having me on. And again, Doug and Ben, nice talking with you guys. Keep doing the fine work you are doing down there to defend people. It's absolutely necessary.
Thank you, Yuri.
Thanks, Yuri.
Absolutely. Well done, Ben, and well done, Doug and Yuri. I so appreciate what you're doing, and I will definitely write something up for people to. I think that there are people who are really worried. You saw it on Facebook too on my wall, Doug. Earlier, I was trying to get more information out of the gal that posted that they just started digging a site near her home, and I know you were trying. I think her name is Sharon Kettler, and she was saying that she took her post down. I think. She had said that there was. Well, she had it up there. She said that if they were building one close to her home. Oh, there it is. I have our active drill site, she says, a quarter mile from her home. So maybe we can get Sharon to get in touch with you, because I don't know what state, I don't know where she's at.
Well, if I could be so bold as I think having Yuri back with one or two other, everybody else was like, well, gee, that's good news. But we really didn't understand what that meant. Pennsylvania had been where the gas industry began, the oil industry began here, 140 years ago, 130 years ago, I guess, and just north of Pittsburgh. And so we were culturally attuned to drilling and so forth in this region. The glory days had long passed, but, there's still gas wells operating and so forth in shallow wells. And for the most part, they're not really all that much of a big deal. However, we're talking about drilling unconventional gas. And as we started to learn, and they started to lease all over the place, they'd lease a mailbox if they could, I think at that time, in like 07 and 8 and 9. We started getting calls in city council in my district and a couple of others in Pittsburgh that people were going door to door, knocking on the door and offering a $1,200 check to lease a, 2,000, 3,000 square foot lot. And it didn't make any sense. So I got calls, and I'm like, well, gee, I better start looking into this. The more I looked into it, the more I had cause for alarm. And it was during this period of time that a place called Dimmock, Pennsylvania, up in the northeastern part of the state, had lost its water. There was a bad well casing put in by a company called Cabot Oil. They steadfastly denied that they were the cause of the contamination for some time, and then eventually it was proven conclusively that there was a bad well casing. That's what protects our water supply, and resulted in the contamination of the village of Dimmock up there in the upper northeast Pennsylvania, near the New York border. We also started to hear from people in Washington County, just south of the city, about 30 miles, and in farmland and whatnot, and there were problems showing up there too. And most notably was the most notorious case was the Hallowich case, where the Hallowich family did lose their water supply. They had not leased, but everybody was around them did. They had wells and a compressor station, a cryo plant, which separates the wet gases, the propane, the butane, and the ethane from methane, which is, the methane is what you see commonly on a stovetop or something like that. And, of course, we heard all about that in the news in the past few months, and it made worldwide news because the family finally settled to get the heck out of there, and they were under a gag order as part of that settlement, including children, which, of course, the industry was terribly embarrassed by the result of that case being unsealed by the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and Washington County Observer reporter wanted to find out what was going on. And, of course, the industry tried like crazy to shield us from the facts, but thanks to the press, they opened it up, and there we found it. And then they backtracked like crazy, saying that you can't gag children. They're minors, and they have First Amendment rights, and they're not bound to their parents' agreements. And during the course of our deliberations in 2010, when it became much more public, we had 3 wells explode within 60, 70 miles of Pittsburgh. One was in Clearfield County, the area around it, which is thankfully sparsely populated, a 2-mile evacuation area. It took 13 to 18 hours, somewhere in thereabouts, for a crew to come up from Texas to put the well fire out, because nobody in Pennsylvania's emergency responder teams know how to do that. And that's expensive, too. You got to equip and train, whether the one's blowing up or not. You got to be ready. And all these things kept coming in. Then we started hearing more about water impacts, air quality impacts, and from there the list just keeps going on. Insurance. All state insurance refuses now to underwrite residential property, for instance. They don't want to assume the risk. This is a corporation that is in the business of bets. They take risk. And educated bets at that, and they didn't like the odds, so they said, we're not underwriting anymore. We have people trying to get refinancing or new mortgages on properties that are leased. Banks are walking away because the collateral on the surface, the home, is going to be devalued as a result of drilling operations, and that's their collateral, so they're not underwriting now. And then, as I said, there's a laundry list of impacts that weren't considered in 2010 that have now come to the fore. And the more we study this and the more we examine the aspects of unconventional drilling for Marcellus Shale and the other shale bed plays around the world, we're finding that it's unconventional for a lot of reasons. And it's a direct threat to the health, the welfare, and the safety of the public. And so that's why we acted. We came forward and we said, hey, wait a minute. We have the rights. We're the people. We're the final arbiters here. And despite what the federal government and the United States Congress has done, good luck there, And in the State House of Pennsylvania, in the governor's office, where $28 million was spent over 6 years lobbying these guys, they weren't thinking about our health, welfare, and safety. So as it has fallen upon local officials throughout the United States to step up, and they have. And they're, thank God for the local official, and we're the ones on the front line now, and we're the ones that stand between the safety of the community and what's going on by these corporate drillers that come in and just want to push everybody aside and tell us we have no rights.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I really appreciate the stand that you've taken and the amount of work and pressure that you've put on them, because that's really what it takes. Ben, I'd like for you to join us now. What, from your perspective, if you'd like to detail that for us, what do you see in your office and working with Tom in regards to the actions that you can take from within the government to oppose and officially ban? Is it just locally for you, or have you reached out at all to other congressmen and lawmakers across the nation to get this ban nationally? And if not, why not?
Well, where we begin to hear about what's wrong, what's going wrong, what isn't working in terms of government and the protections of government, it comes from the local communities. And in the case of Pittsburgh, I was invited to a conversation with one of the city council members, one of Doug's colleagues at the time, who was on council. As a matter of fact, Bill Peduto, who's running for mayor at the moment. I was invited by Bill into a conversation with actually probably more than 25 environmental groups. And the conversation was, what can we do in Pittsburgh to do something to protect the community against this industrial activity of fracking? And so I was directly involved in the Pittsburgh effort and have been with many other communities on this issue. And that conversation expanded into the larger question of, what can local governments do? What does law allow Pittsburgh or any municipality in the country to do to protect the rights of the citizens living within the community? And, unfortunately, the answer is the structure of law that we've constructed over the years doesn't allow us to do much. We have a regulatory system in place. We have regulations that are put in place by the legislature. And then we have regulatory agencies that issue permits that allow certain corporations to engage in industrial activities that have been legalized by the legislature. And then we pretend that we've got an overlay of protections, of regulations that say there are limits on how much damage can be done in any given community. And, that's worked not really very well over the years, but in terms of fracking, with an industrial process that is so clearly a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of the community, to the natural environment, to the rights of the people living in any given community, to their property rights. We have an industry that has been given a clear path to enter into any community. And in Pennsylvania, that was our experience learning what the legislature has done. A clear path was opened up for the frackers to come in against the consent of the community and act against their consent to drill away as almost at will. Zoning was used as a stopgap, as a way of saying, well, we're going to try to remove this, the wellheads and put them at places somewhat distant from our residential areas. And we've had challenges even to that. And I mean in Pennsylvania, through state legislature, in Ohio, and in many other states where fracking is taking place. And so back to Pittsburgh, in 2010, having talked with Bill Peduto, one of the members of City Council, and with a number of other community folks with interest in helping the community, of course, but offering only regulatory solutions. In other words, suggesting that the best you can do under current law is limit the damage. You're not allowed to legally stop it because the state legislature has decreed that fracking is legal. And if it's legal, you must find a place for it in your community.
Left office at the end of 2011. During his tenure on the council, he was recognized for his expertise on government financing, land use and zoning, legislative writing ability, and taking on social issues few others would. He introduced and had enacted laws on matters such as domestic violence within the city police force, prevailing wages for service workers on city-funded projects, protection from harassment at women's reproductive health facilities, reporting of lost or stolen firearms, and a LGBT registry to help facilitate same-sex benefits for the private sector. In August of 2010, he introduced the CELDF, Community Rights Ordinance in the Council, with a unanimous 9-0 vote. He's going to talk about that a little bit with us. It became law on November 16, effectively banning shale gas drilling in Pittsburgh, the first place in the world to do so. And we're going to talk about why this should be banned. We're talking about natural gas. We're talking about hydraulic systems. We're talking about some very contaminants that you don't want in your body. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Doug to the show. Doug, thanks so much for taking the time. I know that I interrupted you today, and you were at a city council meeting, were you not?
Yes, well, I was at the county council meeting. The county executive wants to frack the park, and it's great to be back on the show, Roxy. I really appreciate you having me back on.
Thank you so much. This will be very interesting. I really hope people take notes on this because it does get a little convoluted, but you have such a way, Doug, with words and explaining exactly what's going on. We have another guest on the show, and his name is Ben Price. Ben works with the guest that we did have planned, Thomas Lindsay. But Thomas Lindsay, we kind of got the dates mixed up, and it's okay. Thomas will come back another time. He's actually unavailable to do the show, so I'm very happy to say that Ben Price is here to do the show with us this evening. Ben, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks so much, Roxy. Glad to be here.
Right on. And then we have Yuri Gorby. And Yuri, why don't you go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself as well to the audience, and then we can get started on the conversation of fracking and government.
Well, thank you, Rocky. Thanks for having me on. Excuse me. Yeah, my name is Yuri Gorby. I'm a professor here at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York, and I'm originally from West Virginia. And it's, as we all know, pretty heavily impacted down there, and increasingly so. So I'm really having a great opportunity here to, really am honored to be on the show here, especially with Doug, and looking forward to talking with Ben as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, it's an honor to have all of you. Doug, let's get started on something here. What was your interest? What startled you? What brought fracking to your attention?
It all began with the leasing, and even backing up a little further in 2003, it was a big banner headline here in Pittsburgh. Pennsylvania was sitting on top of a boatload of gas, about commensurate amount of energy that's underneath the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and certainly I and everybody.
You're alive, Roxy.
Oh, we are. There's no intro.
Yeah, I have to pull it in.
Oh, okay. So we're already live. I'm so sorry. Hey, everybody. It's been quite the day. As you well know, all over the news today is this Obama healthcare, whatever you want to call it. And I just want to make mention that really get yourselves educated before the first, Walgreens Walgreens is one who basically dropped the insurance policies today from 160,000 workers, and the many corporations are going to be following suit. So if those of you who are getting your insurance, your health insurance dropped, or you're like my husband who got his rates tripled about 3 days ago, so you might want to consider looking into what is happening. There's a filibuster going on today. Don't you dare turn the channel yet and watch it or listen to it yet. You could probably take a look at it later. But there's a filibuster going on right now regarding the Obama health care. They are trying to block it. And, of course, we're in the 11th hour, a few days away from it going into law October 1st. But you might want to educate yourself. I will be doing a show on it later in the year to help navigate what's going on. And by the way, this is a very difficult thing because some of the states aren't doing the state exchanges. People are confused if they block the funding or the appropriations is what it's called for the bill. We're going to be in a lot of trouble. Of course, they're threatening one more time to close the government down. And you know what I say, and I've said it before, let them close for a couple of days. Please let them close. Anyway, my guests this evening, a little bit of a switch around for who's going to be on the show. Nevertheless, it's going to be even better than we had planned. We're going to talk about fracking, a very, very important topic. I would put it on the top 5 of my priority list if I were anyone listening. Chat room, good evening. If you have any questions for our guests, please put them in the chat room. And if you can put them in all caps, our producer Thomas will be glad to pick them up. My first guest, we're going to bring them on all together. Okay, they all have a perspective, different perspective that we all need to hear. We really need to listen to what these gentlemen have to say. Doug Shields, for instance, in 2003, when Doug won the Democrat primary for Pittsburgh City Council, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette wrote, quote unquote, for 11 years, Doug Shields has been the consummate City Hall insider, working behind the scenes as the chief of staff for former city councilmen. Now he's about to move to center stage. Shields did take center stage and quickly ascended to positions of power in the council. I want to interject here for a moment, listeners. This is a man who is wanting, and successfully has already banned fracking in certain areas. This is one of the good guys. Yes, I know. You don't like people in government. You don't want to talk to anybody who's in government. Let me tell you something. This is a man who did something about it. He's one of the good guys. So, as it says, Shields did take center stage and quickly ascended to positions of power in the council. In 2004, he was appointed chair of the Finance Committee in the throes of the city's financial crisis, and in 2006, he was elected president of the council, and again in 2009, he